Good morning and welcome. Our guest speaker today is Mitch Cohen. Mitch is joining us virtually from his home, from his office in Atlanta, and he has a font of wisdom to share with us today. All right. And he's a witty and wonderful guy too. So Mitch, welcome. Thank you for being with us. Okay.
Good to be here. And I have definitely a font of something, but I can't say the word in public.
Okay. Well, maybe with us you can. All right. Could you just begin by telling us a little bit about your background and some of your current activities? So where are you coming from?
Sure. So, I'm a big Grateful Dead fan. And, one of the lines in the song Truckin' is what a long, strange trip it's been. And I'm living it in every way, shape, and form in my secular life and in my spiritual life. So I'm going to just shorten the crazy journey of the spiritual life. So I was born Jewish. And I was born into a family where three of my grandparents were poor immigrants who came over anywhere between 1905 and 1929. Um, and three of those grandparents were Russian Jews who came over with just whatever bag they carried. And one of them was German, but she was Lutheran when she came over, met my grandfather, and then converted to Judaism, but stayed very connected. To this day, I'm very close with one of my second cousins from Germany. So, always was brought up around interspiritual, interfaithness. Our home was fairly non-observant, but because it's all my parents knew, we belonged to a very traditional synagogue. And a very traditional fashion, I was the oldest son. I had to go to Hebrew school in a synagogue where the rabbi was Orthodox. His wife wore a wig, which is a sign of modesty. So that gives you a sense of what I'll just use the word dogma. What religious focus was foisted upon me, not by choice, right? Because I was born into it. But at age 15, I had it, and some things happened politically at the synagogue, and I fired Judaism and basically became agnostic. I definitely believed in God. I just didn't know what that was. And that carried me through Georgia Tech, where I went to college. And it was after college when I had my first existential crisis, and I was just grabbing at straws around everything. And I realized from a book called Personhood, written by a guy named Leo Buscaglia, who I had never heard of,
Sure.
sort of like the forefront of the personal development movement of the 70s. So this was 82-ish. And he said every self-actualized human being has a very strong spiritual foundation. And so that led me on a spiritual quest. And I explored a lot of different religions. I kept my own for last. Was really drawn to the Eastern traditions, Hindu, particularly Taoism and Buddhism, Shintoism in Japan. And then I read up on something about Judaism I had never. We wouldn't even step foot in a Reformed synagogue. It was a Presbyterian church with a Jewish star, but that wasn't true, right? But my parents, they just couldn't deal with it, right? It wasn't traditional, it wasn't Jewish. And that opened the door to a Judaism that incorporated some of what drew me to the Eastern traditions, and that's meditation. That is Kabbalah or Jewish mysticism, as well as a very liberal theology of God not being perfect and not being all powerful and controlling. And that led me on my journey back to Judaism. So it was a choice. I left it and then I chose to come back, but I also learned to be informed by these other religions. And
Mhm.
little did I know, about 40 years later, I would meet a spiritual teacher named Rami Shapiro, whose whole focus is perennial wisdom taught in all religions. And I've become pretty much a devout student of him and all of his books, and I've been to a number of his retreats. Highly recommend his books. His name is Rabbi Rami Shapiro. So my theology now is I'm a non-dualist. I don't see any separation between God and creation. God's not out there for me. God is definitely not patriarchal. And God is everything. And what that means is, like in the opening verses of Genesis, where God said, and it was good, each creation day I put in parentheses, then everything is acceptable. And that means the good and, yes, the bad, right? Everything is life, right? And if we look to religion to short circuit dealing with pain in life, then that is spiritual bypassing, and that is doing us no good. Um, so that means I'm also a psycho-spiritualist. What does that mean? I'm a text nerd. And when I study biblical text, I look at the context of what is being said or written uh, in whatever translation, because no English translation that exists today is accurate, not a one, because the original biblical text was in biblical Hebrew, and it first got translated into Greek, and that became the language of intellectuals. And then after the Romans took over and Constantine converted, it got written into Latin, right? And then from there, it went to German, then to English. So you tell me any text written in an original language that's been translated 5 times to make it into all the modern Bibles of today. There is no way that it's accurate. And one of the easiest evidence is if any of your Bibles say that Jacob wrestled with an angel, it is 100% absolutely incorrect, because the Hebrew word is Ish Elohim, and that means a divine being. That does not, the Hebrew word for angel is malach, plural is malachim. That's not in the text. So my interpretation is taught to me over the years by several mystical rabbis is Jacob was wrestling with the divine being within, and it was his shadow that was blocking him from that divine being within, right? And what was that shadow? Running from his brother for 20 years, lying, being a mama's boy, all of that stuff. He faced it alone. For the first time, he adulted, right? He realized that he was going to face possible death the next day at the hand of his brother. Sent his wives and everything across the river Jabbok, which is symbolism right there, and faced his shadow. And he prevailed, but he had a limp the rest of his life. And that, like all of us, we are all wounded and we carry those wounds for a lifetime. But if we work through the wounding, then we can lessen the impact. So I just gave you an example of context and psycho-spiritual interpretation of text in 32:25 to 32:32, I think it is. So basically, I led a congregation for 17 years as a lay leader first. I was ordained in 2012 as a rabbi. And I did that because I realized a lot of people who weren't affiliated with congregations still needed life cycle events, weddings in particular, b'nai mitzvah, bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah for girls, or funerals. And rabbis are very busy and they have to first attend to their congregation. Well, you have all these unaffiliated. In Atlanta, the affiliation rate in a synagogue is only like 25%. So you have 75% of Jewish people in the Atlanta area that are not affiliated, that God forbid somebody dies, it's going to be hard to find a rabbi. So that's why I did it. And lo and behold, 2018, as I continued to evolve, studying with the Rami Shapiro and a Buddhist teacher named Adyashanti, I realized that I had simply evolved beyond religion. And so now I consider myself, again, a non-dual panentheist. What is a panentheist? So it's a person that believes that God is in everything, nature as well as the ineffable. I don't know, right? I'm comfortable with the juxtaposition of God is I don't know, and God is everything in nature, including us, and that we are divine manifestations of God, and that we, from our hearts, put out love and compassion, but we can also cover that with shadow and do all the horrible things that humans do. So there is no such thing as hell in a panentheist world. We create the hell right here on earth. And we can also create heaven right here on earth. So one more little piece, life after death. Jews never spend a lot of time worrying about life after death, just a given. What we focus on is our deeds and actions in the here and now. And our rituals and traditions and holidays are all about the theme of what have you done for me now? How have you made the world a better place? How have you treated other human beings with respect and dignity? How have you taken care of the widow, the orphan, and the poor? How have you taken care of the earth? As it says in Genesis 2, we are not dominators of the earth. We are stewards of the earth. That's what the word actually means, right? It is not our job to just take everything and not give back from the planet. Our job is to steward the planet. Again, another mistranslation. So, but now I want to get to 9 texts. I want to culminate it with Leviticus 19:18, which is the golden rule in Christianity and other religions. I don't have the handout handy, but when I was doing a lot of interfaith work here in Atlanta, the Interfaith Community Initiative had a handout that we use in all of our interfaith trips. Not all of them, and some of them, but it had something like 20 religions around the world that have some teaching about love your neighbor as yourself. Mm-hmm. So to me, that talks to the fact that all of religion comes from one divine archetypal source. I don't know what that is. I don't care what that is. But the fact that there are similar teachings in all religions, they weren't talking on cell phones 4,000 years ago, right? Yes, they were crossing on trading routes and probably sharing some information, likely how meditation worked its way into Judaism over 2,500 years ago, traveling to India on the trade routes. But no, the common teaching of love your neighbor as yourself, that's in almost, I can't think of a religion that doesn't have that, because that is archetypal. Big fancy word. It's just in the ether, and we just get it, right? Now, we don't live it because of the shadow stuff that all humans carry and our wounding. Nobody comes out of childhood unwounded. Never to blame parents. We do the best we can. I wish I had set up a therapy fund for all 3 of my sons, but you know, we're human beings, and then there's life circumstances. God, what's going on in Turkey and Syria right now? Those people are traumatized. What's going on in Ukraine? Those children are traumatized. Our own soldiers that came back from Iraq and Afghanistan, traumatized. That wasn't parenting. That was life experience. So we need to help people deal with trauma in order to get down to that spiritual core. But I want to start with Leviticus 19:9. I'm not going to go through all 9, but I think 19:9 and 19:10 speak volumes, and a lot of people ignore it. And 19:9 says, when you reap the harvest of your land, you should leave the corners. And I'm going to look for the exact translation from this particular translation. This is a Hebrew English. It just says, reap the corner of thy field. You shouldn't gather the gleaning of the harvest, right? So who's that left for? That's left for the poor. But it doesn't say to give it to the poor. This is very important distinction. It says to leave it so they have the dignity of gathering it up themselves, right? So I'm going to sound like a conservative here, which I am not, but there is something to say about the power of not just giving away things to the poor, but giving them an opportunity to help themselves, whether that is free training, education, childcare for young women, single mothers, and yes, to have them come into the fields when the tractors don't get everything and say, bring your basket, collect what you can, it's yours.
Yeah.
Second one, similarly, is when you gather from your vineyards, don't gather any of the fallen fruit. Again, leave that. And this one does say, leave that for the poor and for the stranger. I'm going to say this 3 times because it's got to sink in, people. Leave it for the poor and for the stranger. Who are the strangers? They were anybody that weren't within the Israelite people, right? So that means it was open to anybody. The Canaanites, the Egyptians, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, didn't matter. In a modern day context, now I'm going to sound like the other side, right? A liberal. We have to take care of those that are not of European descent in this country. Bible says so. Mitch doesn't say so. Bible says so. But it also says leave the fruit for them to gather, right? So we can set up programs to allow people to learn English, people to get job training, to fill these jobs that Americans just don't want to do, right? 2 texts right there. And then I'm going to jump down to not putting a stumbling block before the blind. That speaks to being honest and transparent in all business dealings. And yes, in all politics. All politicians lie through their teeth, right, to get votes. That's not what the Bible teaches. They should be very transparent about their views. They should not be belittling or demonizing their opponents. They should say, here's what I stand for. If you don't like it, don't vote for me. If you do like it, vote for me. That's really what our politicians should be doing because the Bible says so, right? And in our business dealings, we should be open and honest in whether the car's been in an accident before, whether this product comes from wherever, what the materials are, what all that stuff. And then, okay, here's another one that's taken out of context. Do not swear by my name falsely, right? Elsewhere in the Bible, it talks about not taking God's name in vain. That is not anything about a curse word or a phrase of words beginning with God, ending with another word for a structure that holds back water, right? That's not what that means. The Ugarites, 7,000 years ago, are the ones who created the idea of a contract. And in the contract, you had to promise four things. You had to say what you were selling or agreeing to. You had to agree on the price, number two. You had to define what would happen if anybody broke the agreement. And then the fourth one is, this is what this phrase refers to. You agreed in the name of God to be honest in the contract, right? That's what don't take God's name in vain means. When you make a promise, keep it or clean it up. If you break a promise, own it and just clean it up, right? So you can say the GD word all you want. That is not a violation of the Bible. If you were told that, I apologize. You were told incorrectly. And now, of course, the text that we're here to speak of, and that is Leviticus 19:18. I'll read the whole thing. You shall not take vengeance nor bear any grudge against the children of your people, but you shall love the neighbor as yourself. So let's unpack this one phrase. Number one, you shall not take vengeance or bear any grudge, right? So what does that mean? Open with your feedback when somebody has violated a boundary. If somebody has lied to you, if somebody has mistreated you, if somebody has abused you, you hold the boundary, you protect it, and you speak it without taking their head off. All right. That's what that means. And then give them the opportunity to clean up the mess. They have 3 tries according to Jewish law. And this is what happens between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Everybody has an opportunity to clean up the messes we've made with other people, but we have to go to them. We can't just pray for forgiveness. That doesn't work in Judaism. It's a very action-oriented thing, forgiveness. And we have 3 times to have the person say, you're right. I'm sorry that I hurt you. I'm going to try better to not do that again. And then we accept it. So no a grudge. And then the last piece is important. You shall love your neighbor as yourself, right? So many of us who are in the psycho-spiritual realm interpret that as, I cannot authentically love another person until I love myself. Now, that's not a call for narcissism. Narcissism is I'm the center of the universe and everybody beckons to my call. This is not that. This means I own my fallible, imperfect, very human self. And I love that too. I love my flaws. I love my failures. I love my regrets. I love my gifts. I love the contributions I've made to society. I love it all. Because if I can't do that, there's no way I can authentically love another, because I'm only going to see your crap. In the Christian text, Jesus says, why do you see the speck in my eye and don't see the log or the stick in yours, right? Or that thou who's not, I'm totally misinterpreting this one, but basically anyone who doesn't have guilt should cast the first stone, or anyone who has not sinned should cast the first stone. That actually comes from a real teaching of an adulteress who all the men of the village wanted to stone her to death. That's what the law says. And from what I've read, and correct me if I'm wrong, people, but I thought Jesus went up to them and said, all right, adulteress, yeah, okay. If you haven't committed a sin, then you throw the first stone at her. And everybody put their rocks down and walked away. Love that interpretation, right? So I'll leave it at that, is you got to love yourself, because what that means is when we love our flaws and our shadow, it means we're not projecting that now onto other. There's no other out there. We have no enemies, right? The other political party, they're not our enemy, right? The other people in that other country, they're not our enemy. The other religion, they're not our enemy. If we project our garbage onto them, they're the other and they're our enemy. And that leads us to the world, the broken world we have today. And Jewish mysticism charges us, every one of us, with the job of repairing a broken world through acts of loving kindness. So I'll leave it at that.
Wow. Wow. You are a teacher. Thank you, sir.
Oh, thank you. I've learned from many. So it's a long lineage.
You know what I heard coming through the whole thread of what we were talking about? Yes, every faith tradition has a variation on the golden rule. We all have some sort of a mystical component, and everything that you had to say is based in practicality, actually doing what is best. And I love that. It puts all three of those legs of the stool together. Mitch,
Well,
thank you.
yes. I was just going to close by saying, for me, that's what's worked. You know, I've never put a wall. I shouldn't say that. In later years, I've taken down any wall of resistance and come with what's called an open or an empty bowl of rice to try to fill it with learning from other religions, even Christianity. I've studied the Gospel of Thomas a number of times. I love it. I've taught a class twice on the Gospel of Thomas. I've taught Matthew chapter 5, a class called Jesus Through Jewish Eyes, because everything in Matthew chapter 5 was a Jewish teaching, because Jesus was Jewish.
You mentioned the Kabbalah earlier, and I wanted to ask, was Jesus steeped in the Kabbalah or only in the traditional teachings when he was a child at the synagogue?
That's a really good question. We don't know, because really the Kabbalistic teachings of the time were written down about 100 years after Jesus lived.
Okay.
And up in northern Israel, there's a town called Sfat, and they're just below. It's up on a mountain. Just below in the valley is a cave, and it's believed that Shimon Bar Yochai wrote the first manuscript of Kabbalistic teachings, and then in 1500s, it was then Moses de Leon wrote the Book of Splendor, and that's where he mystically interpreted the Torah.
So maybe for your next visit, when you come to see us live in the room, how's that for a segue? Maybe we can talk about mysticism.
Oh, I would pay you to allow me to do that. I taught Kabbalah for about 20 years. I love it.
Great. Okay, it's game on. And I know you have a new book coming out in the spring, so keep us posted on that, and we'll keep in touch. And when you're ready, come on up to the mountains. We'll feed you and all that good stuff, and you will feed us. All
Sure.
right.
Now something about the book. It's not really a spiritual book. It's a book on men and grieving. And I got stories, including my own, from my journey in life, from 3 other gentlemen and 2 male therapists who worked with men over the years. So really, it's a book about men and grief, how we grew from the experience.
Relevant and much needed.
All right,
Thanks.
you well.
All right, wave to the people.
Take care, everyone.